planning and implementation. And I welcome you to this, this webinar around early childhood multi-tiered system of supports. And I just want to share a little bit about why this webinar even came to be. Back in 2018, MDE released the MTSS practice profile to help create a common definition of what MTSS looks like in Michigan. And as part of that process, we conducted usability testing of that practice profile in our transformation zone, which included Lenawee ISD with district partners, as well as Saginaw ISD and district partners. And through that process, as we were bringing together that first essential component of team-based leadership, we were really looking to include early childhood partners in that work. But what we realized is that while our early childhood partners wanted to come to the table and be full MTSS partners within the districts, we really kind of lacked guidance of what that looks like in best practice. So the result of that is we lifted that to the MTSS leadership team and said, you know, we're really trying to be inclusive of early childhood, particularly our early childhood partners connected to the K-12 system, but we need further guidance. So the MTSS leadership team formed an MTSS early childhood committee to begin exploring what early childhood MTSS could look like for Michigan. And I'm happy to introduce that Pat Sargent from the Office of Great Start and Michelle McQueen from the MiMTSS TA Center are the co-leads for that committee as we begin our exploration work. So as we go into this exploration work, you might wonder, well, who's coming to the table? We have partners from across MDE currently, and we have partners from DHHS. And that also contributes to who we have joining this webinar today to help really kind of join in some common learning as we begin our exploration around MTSS and learning what it's all about. So joining us on this webinar today as invitees to participate are the social emotional consultant team connected to the Department of Health and Human Services through the Division of Mental Health Services to Children and Families. We have also invited Great Start Readiness Program ISD early childhood contacts connected through our Office of Great Start, as well as our Head Start and Early Head Start leadership connected through Office of Great Start. Early childhood special education inclusion builders and leadership connected to the preschool development grant Birth to 5 are also brought to the table through the Office of Great Start. We have partners joining us today from the MiMTSS Technical Assistance Center, the staff who works on behalf of MDE to provide a continuum of technical assistance to ISDs, districts, and schools to support their implementation of the MTSS framework. And we also have early childhood partners from ISDs and districts in our transformation zone that really helped to advocate and push for this needed work. So what you can expect, again, this webinar is an opportunity for us to heighten the field's awareness that we're beginning this exploration work of what early childhood MTSS may look like for Michigan. The work is just beginning. The webinar, we hope, will provide a common knowledge building for our participants as we move into this exploration to define for Michigan what early childhood MTSS looks like. And as we develop that plan, we will be in further contact to give you updates of where we're at and bring additional members to the table to help us further shape what the work looks like in Michigan. The webinar is being recorded today. It will be sent out after the webinar with a link and then also a survey following the webinar to gather more information and thoughts from our participants today. And it will also be posted on the MDE MTSS website. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Lise Fox. We are so grateful to have her today. Being able to provide this webinar and common learning for us today. Lise Fox is a professor at the Department of Child and Family Studies at the University of South Florida and the co-director of Florida Center for Inclusive Communities, a university center of excellence in developmental disabilities. She is one of the developers of the pyramid model, promoting social emotional competence in infants and young children, and is the principal investigator at the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. Welcome, and thank you so much, Lise Fox.
Thank you. So excited to be here. Thank you for that nice welcome. And it's particularly thrilling to join Michigan in exploration around MTSS. The conceptualization of MTSS is to do right by all children, to give all children the best possible educational experience. And I think that's really critical. In many ways, MTSS brings together all the science that we know about learning and education, the support of children and families. So really happy to be a part of your exploration work. As I'm going to walk us through from my lens as a developer of the pyramid model. So I'll tell you a little bit about what that is. And I think I was invited to come and help you with this exploration because the pyramid model offers a lot of promise as the social behavioral side of the implementation of an MTSS. So we've been thinking a lot about the implication of the pyramid model as states and programs build a comprehensive MTSS. And we've been thinking a lot about the alignment of the pyramid to it, how the pyramid can be integrated within that effort, and how our critical elements align. So that's what I'm going to talk about with you, really from my lens of promoting young children's social emotional competence, but also with a passion for children's holistic development and wanting to join you in thinking about that. So what we're going to do is I want to talk about, kind of stage this work. I'll unpack the pyramid just a little bit because most people know what that is, and then talk about how it fits and aligns with MTSS and the work, the exploration work that you're going to be doing in Michigan. As I'm speaking, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the question answer pod. We'll have a little bit of time for questions, and those may be questions for me for clarification or more information, but they may also be questions for your Michigan colleagues about where are we going with this and what will we be doing. And then we'll have a few minutes to do questions, but all the questions ultimately will be addressed by the Michigan team as they talk. So let me remind ourselves when we get started about why we're here, and why we're here in particular around young children. The promise of early education is about helping children start their learning trajectory with towards the best possible outcomes. And I think we have all pitched the importance of providing high quality early childhood programs with the idea that this is a window of brain development, of child development that's critically important. And in many ways, we can influence a child's lifelong trajectory in those early years. And I want you to hold on to that notion, because to me, that notion creates an urgency about providing the very best that we can, the very best of instruction, the very best of intervention, in a way that brings everything we know about the science of child development and the science of instruction together to be able to do that in a way that really delivers on that promise of early childhood programs. When I speak to you, I'm speaking about all children. I'm speaking about children with disabilities. I'm speaking about children who live with advantage and children who may come from communities and circumstances with some disadvantages. That we need to be ready when our doors open. We need to be ready for all of those children, and we need to be able to meet the needs of all of those children. And I think that really brings us to the conversation about why MTSS and what MTSS can do. I'm also very concerned, and the reason we developed the pyramid model was about young children with challenging behavior. And one of the things that we know about the research literature is that when young children present with social emotional delays or challenging behavior in the early years, that despite the adage that they might grow out of it, often they don't grow out of it. And so in the early years, we really have an opportunity to change the trajectory of a child's social and emotional development. We have an opportunity to prevent future mental health concerns and issues as children grow older. And so from my lens and the work that we've been doing in the development of the pyramid model, we are really hopeful that if we bring evidence-based practices in those early years around promoting social emotional competence, intervening with child challenging behavior, that we can prevent this trajectory of children arriving at school with challenging behavior, continuing to have challenging behavior and problems, and later in adolescence experiencing some of the effects that often occur when a child has a trajectory of challenging behavior. And those effects include high school dropout, early contacts with juvenile justice system, and future bad outcomes such as unemployment. So it's critically important that we figure this out for young children. It's also critically important because we know that in early childhood programs, people are unable often to be able to meet the needs of kids who are beginning to display challenging behavior. So we have some alarming data around early expulsion and suspension and how that predicts later expulsion and suspension, how this happens more often in child care programs, and then even more very discouraging and highly alarming, I believe, data around racial disparities with young boys of color being suspended and expelled at disproportionately higher rates. Some have talked about a preschool to prison pipeline that we can actually track, that if kids are unsuccessful early on and experiencing this, that we, without using things like MTSS and the best of the science that we know how to do for intervention, that those kids have really poor outcomes. And so we're driven at the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations to try and address this in the work that we're doing. And so the Pyramid Model Center, our vision is that we are ambitious about trying to help states and programs implement high quality programs where we're working in partnership with families, where children have those positive social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes, and that we can have programs where there are no incidents of suspensions and expulsion, and that when children have behavior challenges, their needs are met within those programs, and that we have the pyramid model, which would promote social emotional competence, prevent challenging behavior from occurring, and address those behavioral challenges when children present with them effectively. So just to get us kind of all on the same page, I want to talk about what is the pyramid model and how we conceptualized it. The pyramid model was really developed because unfortunately, I guess 20 years ago, we got our first initial funding. And our funding was from the Office of Child Care Head Start, and then the Office of Special Ed Programs funded another research and technical assistance center. And all of those agencies were concerned about the data around children who had behavior challenges and wanted us to get out there and help people know what the evidence-based practices were that they could use to address that. The researchers who worked together on that work said answering the question about what are the behavior interventions is the wrong path. The right path is how do we promote kids' social emotional skills? How do we prepare programs so they are ready for all children who walk through that door? How do we make sure that teachers have the practices that can promote social emotional competence, be able to prevent behavior challenges from occurring, as well as be ready for children who present with challenges for whatever reason? What are those practices? And so the pyramid was built really by pulling those research-based practices together. We looked at the data. I mean, I remember the conversation of all of us saying, we know what the practices are. How do we arrange them in a way? How do we support teachers to use them so people can use the best of that science in their work in guiding young children's development? And that's how we began with the pyramid model. I'll tell you a little bit soon about the research that we've done after this pyramid was built. So I want you to think about the pyramid as a framework of evidence-based practices. It's defining the what, and that's going to be important because as we talk about MTSS, then we begin to talk about the how. So the practices are the what. It's what we want to see happening around social emotional competence and addressing challenging behavior. And at the foundation of our pyramid is relationship. And there are a host of practices there that we've identified. And the research is very clear that without that foundation of relationships, we can't put in place those other practices. And the relationships we think about, of course, are child relationships. So the early years are the time children are learning how to be social. My passion for this is because if you don't have that, if you don't have the ability to interact with others, you lose the context that all other learning occurs within. So we need children to learn how to be a part of a group, how to interact with others, how to interact with their peers. We think about our relationships between a teacher and a child in those interactions that help children grow, help children be connected in the classroom. We think about the relationships between the teaching staff and families and how we connect to families as we do this work in those early years. The relationships level of the pyramid is paired with high quality environments. And that really includes all of the practices that across Head Start, across National Head Start, as well as Head Start TA centers, as well as National Association for Education of Young Children, as well as the Division of Early Childhood. We're all in really good agreement about what's a high quality practices that we should see universally to be able to promote the learning of all kids. We look at it through the lens of what needs to be in place to promote social emotional competence. And so it includes a lot of practices around how we do the environment, how we schedule things, how we help kids move, how we help kids understand. You know, the whole idea of coming to a classroom when you're 3 and 4 years old is kind of a wild endeavor, right? There are not many of us who would say, oh, let me go shopping with 24-year-olds, because having 24-year-olds in a group is a really hard thing. And so teachers have to be incredibly artful about these practices so kids can understand how to be a part of a group, how to move in the environment, and are ready to learn. We also think about at this level the classroom management practices, teaching rules and expectations, providing descriptive feedback and encouragement to children to be able to foster their engagement and to be able to grow, help them grow in their social emotional competence. So we think about those two levels, and you can think about it as our universal practices. So what ought to be universally available to promote the social emotional competence of all children in the program. We then also, as we conceptualize the model, thought about the social emotional instructional part. Because it's in the middle, it's a little bit misleading. We don't think of social emotional as only tier 2. Universally, all children need a very rich, very heavy dose of social emotional instruction. Again, those early years, those kids come to us, if they're coming in at age 3, with really not being socially connected to groups and learning how to do that and how to navigate that. And so in our social emotional supports, we want all children to receive very rich instruction in social emotional learning. And the domains that we have aligned our practices to are the domains that you will see in every high quality evidence-based social emotional curricula. So self-regulation skills, expressing and understanding, expressing your own emotion, understanding the emotions of others, understanding what emotions are, engaging in social problem solving, and developing social relationships. So all kids need to know that. And those domains are consistent across all evidence-based curricula. But we know that some kids struggle with learning that. And so even if I'm using a curricula for teaching all of my kids that, I need to be ready for those kids who struggle. And teachers need to know how to use the practices of explicit instruction. And when I talk about explicit instruction, I'm talking about increased opportunities, increased learning opportunities, more opportunities to practice and receive feedback, the ability to plan that with families, so families know how to do that as well in home and community environments, and then to be able to monitor the progress. If we're going to offer more enriched instruction, more precise instruction, then we want to know if it's working for children. And I think every early educator on this call would say time is of the essence, right? We have these children for such a short amount of time that we want to monitor progress, because if it's not working, we want to be able to change what we're doing to support kids. So then the last level of the pyramid we think about is, and I help teachers think about it, is when a child walks through that door, and I don't know when we open in the fall, who's coming in my classroom. I want to be ready for all of those children. We want all of those children to belong and have a place in the classroom. And so we need to be ready to provide those individualized interventions for children who might have very intense social emotional delays or behavior challenges. And when we design those interventions, we want them to be comprehensive, to work across all settings, both home and preschool or home and early childhood classroom. We're going to use assessment. And when I talk about assessment, I'm not talking about a tool. I'm talking about the process of really understanding that child's development, what that child's experienced, and what that child brings, as well as the family context. Working together as a team, and then with a focus, of course, when children have challenging behavior, we want challenging behavior to reduce, but our focus is about building that child's skills and competencies. And so we will do that around using individualized positive behavior support, which has hundreds of studies verifying the evidence base of this approach to developing a behavior support plan. And hopefully we're doing that in partnership with families so that we can apply that plan across all relevant environments. So that's what we built with the pyramid model. That's how we aligned our practices and built the pyramid model. We've tested it now in 2 randomized trials. And what we did in the randomized trials is looked at, if you brought this to a whole classroom, and what does it take to help teachers implement all those practices with fidelity? And what are the outcomes for children? And so we have some nice data that shows really the promise of the pyramid in application to the classroom. But in order to do this experiment, we needed to be able to measure whether or not teachers were implementing the practices with fidelity, right? We don't want to just train them and hope that they're implementing those practices. We want to know they're implementing the practices. So that brought us to the development of the teaching pyramid observation tool. Some of you may know that. And what it really measures is a teacher's capacity to be able to do all of those practices. And we use that tool. That tool is an outcome of the first experiment, and we use not the first efficacy trial, but a development trial, and then we use that in our efficacy trials to be able to measure whether or not our professional development could get teachers there. And if, when they're there, we see the kind of outcomes that we hope we would gain from the implementation of the pyramid model. So that brought us to, how do you do professional development well so people can do the practices? And in that work, we developed what many of you know, those of you from Head Start have seen this because this is used in the Head Start technical assistance work. We developed a practice-based coaching framework. And so we developed a very specified way to provide classroom coaching. What we learned was training was insufficient. I think we know that. But training plus coaching that is focused on a set of practices and uses what the research says works for coaching, that kind of coaching could move teachers to fidelity of implementation. And actually, this framework now has been used in multiple randomized trials. So we have a lot of confidence that we have an evidence-based coaching framework that we can use to help teachers get there to high fidelity implementation of pyramid model. And of course, we wanted to know when we get teachers there, what are the outcomes? And we wanted to know across the whole class. So if we change a class and we have teachers implementing these practices with Fidelity, what happens to all the children? And then we had a few children as focal children, children who had challenging behavior, to see what happens with those children. And what we saw is what we predicted and had hoped would happen, that children with challenging behavior, their behavior was reduced, that we had observations of their social interaction skills, and those positive social interaction skills went up. And then across all children, social emotional skills went up. And so we have some really nice data around the effects for all kids in the classroom and the effects for children with challenging behavior in the direction that we hope they would go. All right, so what does all this mean for MTSS? And I'll start with thinking about what is MTSS, because the MTSS is more than the pyramid. MTSS is a comprehensive framework, and our ambition for MTSS is the social emotional pieces there, but also the early literacy work, academic skill side, the early numeracy and the early literacy, that we could do all of that and bring the best of our science of child development and education to bear to be able to promote the development of the whole child, right? So it's a comprehensive framework. It, like the pyramid model, is prevention oriented. It uses data to figure out how do we efficiently and effectively make sure every child gets what they need. So it's the promise of that instruction. And to me, when we get MTSS working in our early childhood settings, it brings the very best of what we know how to do in service to children and families. So in Michigan, you have your practice profile now, and I've spent a little bit of time looking at it and unpacking what these pieces mean and thinking about what they might mean as you think about or bringing this to early childhood. So what are the implications of each of these components? I don't know if you call them components. I won't profess to be well steeped in your practice profile, but your practice profile, of course, is consistent with how everyone is going about the work of figuring out MTSS and how we bring this to our educational programs. So what I want to do is just raise some of those questions. I'm going to answer some of them for you because we've been thinking about them, but I want to frame and help you begin to think about. So we have this pyramid model that's a framework of practices. How might it be used in this? So you have a concrete example of how does that come into an MTSS, as well as think about what is the big work that we need to do to figure out the application of each of these to the early childhood setting. So in your practice profile, there is the team-based leadership, which is about teams really at every level, right? A child, at the building level, at the district level, at the state level, of figuring out how are we going to get this done? How will we make this happen so we can bring this very ambitious effort to young children? And so I think some of the questions that'll pop as you think about the early childhood years is, who are the bodies to be at the table to think about this? And you've already begun that in your exploration work. How do we implement it in cross-sector systems? I always tell my school colleagues, it's like early childhood is a whole different animal, right? We talk about the system, but we have multiple systems. It's really cross-sector, and it's not cookie cutter. It's not a school building and a school board. It's very different. We want to make sure our alignment was, that we get aligned with schools so it's a seamless and aligned system. And I think when we get that, when we get high quality early childhood, community early childhood programs that are linked to high quality public preschool programs and then linked to our K through 12 system in a seamless and aligned fashion, that we're going to do the best by children. And thinking about then who should be at the table. I think always at every level when we're teaming, we need the people at the table that represent that birth to 5 perspective, that knowledge of child development, and developmentally appropriate practices. We think about this. In terms of the tiered delivery systems, so this is really the implication here is, What is it that we're going to use in these tiers? How will we know if we're doing it well? Just like the pyramid model, what are the practices we need to meet the needs of children at every level? How will we monitor progress? How will we think about family partnerships? And in that way, we want to think about, what does that mean then for our infant, toddler, and our preschool classroom? So what is high quality instruction? I feel strongly that we've mapped out what it is for social emotional. But we need to think about, what is it for literacy and numeracy, for universal? What do we want to see? And then what are our other tiers? And then what tools will help us understand if that universal is in place or not? We have early learning guidelines. How will we align this with our early learning guidelines? So in almost every state, and I'm sure in your state, people have come together to be really thoughtful about what are the outcomes we're aiming for in our early learning guidelines or in the Head Start framework, and how do we align to that? And what interventions then are we going to bring when children need more? In your component around selecting and implementation of the instruction and interventions and support, you're really thinking about what's the best evidence around what we can use, and how do we stay current? How do we provide professional development so people can use those tools? And so the selection that you'll have to be doing in early childhood is thinking about the developmentally appropriate curriculum and interventions that can be used and are being used to bring to this endeavor, and how you're going to deliver effective professional development so that people can implement the things they select with fidelity. That's really critical. We can have all the great ideas we want around what we ought to be doing, but if we don't know if we're doing it and doing it well, then there's no point in measuring child's outcomes. Well, there's a point, but you know what I mean, right? So also, there's this, in an MTSS, we want to be able to use assessment and screening tools. And the purpose there is to be efficient and effective. And I always think about time running out. Kids are with us for such a short amount of time. Kids are in a classroom in such a short amount of time that these tools are at service of making sure we get instruction to children. We get intervention to children who need that. And that's what we're thinking about when we're selecting those tools. And so we're going to be thinking about what tools are available for screening assessment for young children. Are they culturally sensitive? Are they reliable? Are they valid? And then when we do progress monitoring, how do we do it so we can do it in the classroom, so it's efficient, that it's developmentally appropriate, and it gives us meaningful information, enough information to know if our instruction is working or not. All of these are going to be decisions that you need to make. And then finally, as we do something as ambitious as the MTSS, we need to know and we need to monitor. Did we put it in place? Is it making a difference? Is it making a difference for children? Is it making a difference for everyone who's engaged in that endeavor? Collecting those data, being thoughtful about our evaluation. And our evaluation includes not just their children changing, but how are we feeling about the implementation of that? How do families feel about that, and other critical stakeholders in the community? And so in thinking about that, what are the data tools that'll really help you with that process in evaluating your implementation process, child outcomes, as well as the perceptions of people involved in this work? So back to the pyramid model. Remember I said it's the framework of evidence-based practices. And to the disappointment of my colleagues, as we've talked about MTSS, I would say to them, the pyramid model is amazing and critically important, and I think has offered something, a unified message about what we can do across all early childhood systems and classrooms. And if you don't know, we have a version for early intervention. We have a version for infant toddler classrooms, as well as in our preschool classrooms. So what we offer is the multi-tiered interventions or practices, a framework for the interventions, but guidance about the practices. What isn't articulated in the triangle I just showed you is our team-based leadership. Critically important to bring that. our comprehensive screening and assessment. I didn't talk about that at all. I was talking about some of the practices within the pyramid model, our continuous database decision making. And so as we've helped people understand how to bring the pyramid model and use it in a system, it requires other pieces. So I want to share with you the pieces we've thought about, because I think many of these pieces are going to intersect with your MTSS work. So we think about the pyramid as being our promotion, prevention, and intervention practices, and our ability to support an effective workforce to do that. But to bring it into a system, you need a team to think about how to make that happen. You need a team to think about how do we support teachers to be able to do all of those practices? How do we engage with families around those practices? How do we use data tools to understand if we're doing it with fidelity and if we're meeting the outcomes and kids are getting what they need? And so this graphic kind of unpacks for you many of the key elements that need to be a part of that system approach to bring the pyramid model to a program. And so as we've done the work, we've thought about there needs to be an implementation team that's consistent with what you're thinking about in your practice profile, that meet regularly, that use data for decision making. We need to have an implementation plan for how we're going to get staff buy-in to really understand this framework, to be able to serve on intervention teams, to support each other in thinking about how to support children. We need to make sure that the staff have a way to give feedback, that feedback rolls up both to at the school level, up to the state level, and that we have good channels of communication in the guidance of the implementation. So we need to work very hard on staff buy-in so that people are on the same page and are able to implement this. We need to be very focused around family engagement. And when we think about this and bringing it to our programs and our teams, we want families on each of the teams. We want family voice on the teams. We want family and community input as part of the decision-making around implementation, as well as family engagement in planning for their children and implementing interventions for their children. We, of course, from the social and emotional and behavior, we think about program-wide expectations, and we think about bringing those expectations to the level where children might understand them and be a part of them. In the behavior work, having these expectations that all staff know, that we teach all children, becomes kind of the glue of our effort of working together. We need to be really thoughtful about the professional development piece. And so we would say to you and guide you as you do your exploration is think about how you train in practices and how you coach in practices and intervention to fidelity. We feel very confident in the practice-based coaching framework and feel like that has been tested and proved to be effective. Our teachers who receive practice-based coaching have they have both enjoyed it as well as been able to move to fidelity of implementation, really critically important. We need to know whether or not, if we launch into this and we want people to use a set of practices, are they implementing those practices with fidelity? And so I shared with you the TPOT. We also have the tippy toes for our infant toddler practices. So we need to define what it is we expect teachers to be doing at the universal level and be able to measure whether or not that's occurring within the classroom. TPOT and tippy toes could be one tool that you could use. As we think about it as an MTSS then, at the universal level, we're going to have social emotional teaching on those 4 domains, but we want to also see if a child has social emotional delays, are we delivering explicit instruction to individual children? Do they receive those increased opportunities for instruction, practice, and feedback, and have a progress monitoring tool on skill acquisition, whether or not they're learning those skills? And again, at the intensive individualized interventions, we're going to be developing a behavior support plan. We're going to need to look to make sure that's implemented with Fidelity. And we're going to want some progress monitoring to see if indeed children are learning social emotional skills and problem behavior is being reduced. We've developed some tools, and those tools could be a part of this work. We have a lot of confidence in those tools. And we have a tool to help people think about the system, which is called the benchmarks of quality. We already touched on the TPOT and TPOTs. We track coaching to make sure coaching is being done with Fidelity in coaching logs. We're also going to want to understand where kids are in behavior from my perspective, as well as how we're responding to behavior. So we've created a system to track how people respond to behavior when it occurs for the purpose of supporting children and supporting teachers. But it also tracks issues of disproportionality in those incidents, as well as within inappropriate response practices, meaning suspensions and dismissals. I think that's really important, that we have our lens on if things are happening disproportionate for gender, race, and ethnicity, developmental disability, and dual language learners. We need to understand that and be mindful of equity as we do all of this work for children. So some tools have already been developed. Now, how might you put this all together in an MTSS? And people have asked me about that. And of course, it's not just about what we've developed, because what we developed was the pyramid framework, and a framework is flexible. A framework is a container. And so within that framework are other things, right? Might be a social emotional curriculum, might be someone's conceptualized tier 2 intervention. So I put this slide together as I've tried to help people think about, what do we have already? What do we already have or is out there that might be brought together? I'm thinking about from the social emotional behavioral. That's my area of expertise. And there are people who have really wonderful expertise around numeracy, literacy, as science to help us think about that as well. But so just let's take one slice and think about the social emotional. So at the universal, you of course want to have people implementing pyramid model practices, but we might bring in a curriculum, like Second Step is one that's commonly used. Preschool PAS has wonderful data around it. ALS PALS is another one. There are screening measures that we might use. You might be using the behavior incident report system as kind of a screen for whether or not children are having problem behavior and thinking about it that way. Or you might use a standardized form. Across the country, people are using the ages and stages questionnaire and social emotional, which is a nice screening tool that can be used, as well as a really great way to build a relationship with a family as you interview them. In terms of progress monitoring, many programs, many states are using TS Gold, can be a curriculum embedded progress monitoring, the BIR. At tier 2, there actually are some conceptualized tier 2 social emotional packages. First Steps is one. Best in Class, Maureen Conroy has been developing that with Kevin Sutherland in Virginia. Those are packages. You might say tier 2, and we would put forth that tier 2 could be systematic instruction using the social emotional teaching practices within the pyramid model. There are also tools that help us come up with the instructional goals for tier 2 that we might be able to use. Tier 2 is probably the place where we haven't unpacked everything well in a standardized way, where you'll want to spend more time really working to conceptualize what that is and how we'll measure progress. I'm very interested in the direct behavior rating. I think it's a really, explore that a little bit. I think it's efficient, effective, and may really fit nicely within our early childhood classrooms where people can't use cumbersome progress monitoring tools. And then we've worked hard to think about tier 3 in a package that's manualized, that helps teams move through that efficiently and effectively to develop a plan for any child who needs a behavior support plan. And so I'm sharing this with you to share with you, there's a lot out there that you can bring to this exploration work as you think about MTSS in Michigan programs. I hope that you'll visit our website. I enjoyed being able to share a little bit with you, but I hope you go and explore many of the tools and the things that we've developed around the social, emotional, and behavior. And I'm going to end this presentation with a thank you to my funder, and then I think we're ready to go to questions and answers. Hopefully you've put something in the box. We have a little bit of time left.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle McQueen, and we're going to go ahead and take some time for questions now. So just a reminder, you can use the question and answer button or little icon in the bottom. But we can get started, Lisa. I have a couple. One is, why is program-wide implementation important?
That's a big question. So the program-wide part of this is, well, let me start with, the first thing I'll say to teachers and say to administrators is, you shouldn't, it's a misstep to think you're going to train teachers in practices, ask them to use practices, and not support them to do that. So the system piece, the program-wide piece nature of it is, what have we put in place so that teachers are able, what's our implementation infrastructure so teachers are able to use those practices? In early childhood, it's particularly important to ensure that we know how we're going to train people, because we have, unfortunately, a lot of turnover in our classrooms. We also, as a whole program, can do a lot of setting the stage for family engagement, we're going to need to be able to think about how are we going to do the coaching. We're going to establish the data systems. So without the program-wide nature of this, it ends up being one teacher at a time, whether or not they can, whether or not they have the resources to do it. And often what is the outcome there is a failure to be able to implement with fidelity.
Thank you. Another question is the pyramid model graphic. How does the MTSS address the base of that with effective workforce?
Well, the effective workforce part of it is the professional development elements of the MTSS, the monitoring of fidelity. So when we talk about an effective workforce, we're talking about people having both the knowledge, the skills, and the support to be able to do the work of the pyramid model. And so MTSS is really the vehicle, or those systems pieces are the vehicle that allows people to be able to do that work. It's the higher level thinking about, we're going to do the pyramid model, in my case, or we're going to do a comprehensive model. We're going to support teachers to be able to do that. We're going to train them to do that. We're going to hold ourselves accountable to their fidelity of practices. And we're going to give them what they need to be able to make this happen. All of that is a part of the effective workforce. Now, I know in early childhood, and I don't know if this question came from an early educator, there's some other things we're really struggling with around early childhood systems, around issues of staff wellness, issues of low pay, kind of the unfortunate history of early care and education is being devalued and not supported in the way that we've supported schools. But I think having an MTSS team wrapped around what we're trying to do in an early childhood classroom means that we're investing in making sure that our teachers are supported to do this work.
So Lisa, can you talk about who would be on the MTSS team?
At what level? So If we're thinking at the district level, so we want to have representation of kind of the usual suspects at the district level, people in charge of instruction. Perhaps there's a position, hopefully there's a position dedicated to MTSS. But we also want to have the leader of probably preschool special education, because we have children 3 to 5 years in our public school system. We're going to want to have any of our ancillary programs, or not ancillary programs, but our programs that might be funded through different funding streams like Head Start and Early Head Start. If you have a public pre-K classroom that might come under some other different administration, all of those people need to be at the table. At the district level, I'd have a family member at the table. Then we're going to have kind of a similar arrangement at our building level teaming. So we're going to have building level MTSS teams, and at the building level, we hope that a preschool educator is going to be on the team, because they bring a different lens to this work, and that's really important. You might say, oh my gosh, are we going to have a preschool, a K, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5? Everybody, now our team's too big to be functional. I would say to you, as we try to stretch this, that distinction of having a preschool educator is more important than making sure you have a 2nd grade teacher and a 3rd grade teacher and a 4th grade teacher on the team. At the state level, we're going to want to make sure our cross-sector partners are at the team, and it sounds like you're there in your exploration. So Head Start, childcare, all should be at the team, as well as our public preschool, to have input in how we build this.
Thank you. Just a clarification, is the pyramid model an integrated model, social-emotional behavior, and pre-academic, like reading?
No. It doesn't include reading. So it is if you think about if the MTSS is its own triangle, we kind of have our half here, right? Our section of social, emotional, and behavior. And what we will want to build out, right, is our early literacy interventions, our vocabulary intervention, numeracy. So what are our best practices there? Our universal practices around all of those early academic domains, and what interventions might we use to help children who aren't making progress.
I have a question. How would you answer parents when they ask, what is a multi-tiered system of support?
That's a really good question. I don't have my elevator speech for that. What I would say is, we've developed a system to ensure that every child is learning and making progress. And so we think about being ready to offer good, high quality instruction to all children, as well as if kids have any struggle or other tiers of intervention, make sure that child gets the best of what we know how to do quickly and effectively, so that they can make progress. I probably then rehearse that elevator speech a little bit and fine tune it so families would understand. I think helping families understand what it is and their engagement with us is going to be really important. And that's a good investment of some of the effort of a multi-tiered system of support team, planning team.
Well, it looks like we've covered all of our questions. Lisa, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much for this opportunity. I wish you well in this work. And I hope I can come back and see where you're going, and offer any additional expertise to you. I have one reflection. I think these are really difficult and troubling times. And I think the promise of high quality early childhood programs is a piece of the puzzle of combating some of the issues that we're being witnessed to right now every day in our communities. And of course, I believe a lot of that is about the social emotional intervention, getting better at doing that, doing that to the very best of our ability so that we can offer these little ones, all children, that promise, the promise of being able to be members of community, learn with each other, engage in social problem solving, to have classrooms that reflect our values and principles about equity and the support of children. So thank you.
Thank you for that reflection. I'd like to close by turning things over to Pat Sargent. Can you hear me, Pat? Well, I think Pat was going to close and thank everybody for their attendance and thank Lisa for presenting to us. It was a great overview, and it's certainly going to add to our common knowledge of MTSS, pyramid model, and how do we start thinking about the context of early childhood. So, oh, there's Pat.
I couldn't get unmuted initially. We do want to thank you for joining us today. It's very important. The webinar is a great next step in our work. Each of you, as Liz said, were invited because you have a connection to people on the exploration team. And so we will be coming back to you in the future. We want to thank Lisa for sharing her knowledge and her expertise with us. That's a tremendous help to our work. And we want you to know that within the next day or two, you will receive a short survey asking for your input, particularly around your familiarity with early childhood MTSS. We will follow up within the next week with answers to any other questions that we have received or receive in the next few days. We will keep coming back to you periodically for your input and to share some resources with you. So we, again, thank you and wish you a great day.